Welcome to this month's Millennial Spotlight, brought to you by Lead with Intention. I'm Leslie Bosserman, Executive Coach and Lifestyle Strategist, partnering with millennial leaders and their managers. The purpose of these conversations each month is to feature millennial changemakers and to deepen and extend the dialogue around how to lead with intention. This month, we're focusing on the intention of being and becoming fearless. So how that works to your advantage in your business and in your overall life. So I'm excited to be here today with Rey Castellanos, and he's going to talk to us a little bit more about his work as a founding curator of the Global Shapers Sacramento Hub and as his work as a leadership coach as well. So he'll tell us more about how to lead beyond fear, and we're just excited to welcome you, Rey. So welcome to our segment.
Thanks, Leslie. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's see. Well, I'm originally from Southern California. I come from a very large family. I think my mom has like 6 sisters and 1 brother. My dad has like 5 brothers and 1 sister. So I like to think of it more as a clan than anything. And I've been coaching for about 5 years now. When I got into this, I started as 1% of the youngest coaches that were out there in the world, kind of like you. And yeah, it's been a pretty wild adventure since. I have a business degree from Sac State, which is what brought me to Sacramento. And after that, I just kind of jumped in headfirst into coaching and never looked back.
So what do you feel drew you to this realm of coaching? Just like you say, we're some of the youngest millennial coaches out there. So knowing that, what called you to this?
Yeah. I've always kind of had, I was always kind of drawn towards it. And if I look back, it was when I was probably around 15 or 16, I started tutoring at a tutoring center down in Southern California, working with K through 12 kids. And the founder of the school was this pretty amazing individual who had several masters and his doctorate. He traveled all around the world, and he's in the military, and he was like a black belt in some martial arts. And he had Tourette's as well. So he did all of that with Tourette's. And if you're not familiar, when he talks, he can't control the volume of his voice. And so it's just constantly up and down. And it's kind of a pretty apparent thing. And to do all those things and amazingly well was just mind-blowing to me with that. And I remember when I was super fascinated in the area of personal growth and I had not really known much about it, he gifted me the first book that I ever read in personal growth, and that kind of started me down this path, and have never looked back.
That's excellent. I know there are so many mentors and just people we meet on our path that inspire us, and that's a really good example of just kind of overcoming and leading beyond fear. Not being afraid of something that is either biological or something that can't help, just learning how to manage through it and lead through it. So tell me a little bit about fearlessness. What does this mean to you, and why did you choose to base your work around it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Fearlessness. I don't like to use the word fearlessness because I don't believe that really exists, at least not for most human beings. But leading beyond fear is something that I practice in my daily life, but that I work with all my clients around. And specifically, I remember when I first wanted to get into the coaching industry. This is something I'd always wanted to do. I thought I had to be a lot older, kind of one of those gray-haired guys that owned a lot of businesses and all this other stuff first, and I could get into it. And so that was my plan. Go to business school, do all this other stuff. And then I had a friend who took a coaching course in Sweden, and she reached out to me and said, Rey, you have to check this out now. You don't have to be a lot older. Just make sure you go to a really good school. It's credentialed to the ICF, and go from there. And so that began this portion of about 6 months to a year where I just spent so much time researching and looking for other coaches and interviewing coaches. And what I was looking for at the time was a path, or a young coach that was doing making some kind of dent in the world. And I couldn't find it. And I interviewed tons of coaches, and all the people that I interviewed who I thought had all the answers that I would be looking for. Totally did not. I interviewed this one guy who was a professor at a university. He was PhD. He's traveled all around the world, done all these really amazing things. And when I talked to him, it just totally fell flat. And finally, towards the end of the year, I finally met a coach or two that everything they said just really resonated with me. And I knew I wanted to do it, but I was so terrified. There was no clear pathway for me to do what I wanted to do. There was no example of somebody that had done it at the age that I was looking to do it at. And there was a ton of really big ambiguous questions on whether I could even do it, if it would make sense. Who wants to be coached by someone that's 24? And at the end of the day, I sat there for a while, really kind of feeling all that out. And I decided that, this is something I would never want to regret. And I don't care what I needed to do, I'm going to do it. And that's kind of how I just jumped in head first. And yeah, I think the topic of fearlessness comes up a lot. I remember countless times when I was learning to become a coach, when I was coaching people 2 and 3 times my age on the most important things in their life. And there was a lot of fear I had to get over in myself to be able to do that. And I remember, and this is still something that I use today, that one of my guiding principles for the things that I do when I walk through fear is if I'm going to be the best coach as I can be, then I need to walk my talk. And that's usually something big enough to grasp. What I've found over the last 5 years and working with hundreds of entrepreneurs and change makers, that it's not an exclusive. Everybody experiences fear in some way or another. Maybe they just don't usually talk about it. And so it's something that's so prevalent, but often hidden away, because our culture traditionally has not wanted to. You don't have people who look weak or they don't have it all figured out. And so fear is something that I think we all experience, and it's not a bad thing, and it's not necessarily a good thing. It's just something that's there, and that's why I believe that leading beyond fear is different than not having fear at all.
No, that's such a brilliant way to clarify that. So this idea and this intention of fearlessness, or being fearless, doesn't mean that you can't experience fear or have fear. It rather looks at it and says, because I have this fear, what am I choosing to do now? So I think that's a big kind of like aha and a big clarifying way to address fear, and to not let fear be something that limits you or stops you, but something that you almost invite in to explore, so you can then, like you say, lead beyond it. So tell me a little bit more about millennials and how you have witnessed them kind of show up like in this kind of fear space. So for example, if you have someone who's like in their 20s or early 30s and they have something that they're afraid of, whether it's like a legitimate physical fear or something specifically with regard to their leadership or being perceived a certain way, what have you seen them kind of experience or encounter?
Yeah. Well, I think every single one of those things that you mentioned, I've seen in one way or another, from physical impairments to emotional fear, or fear around really reaching towards something that it's really compelling to them, because once you make that dream into a reality, or at least you try to, then there's the potential that it might not work. I've worked with a lot of women in the past few years, and one thing that comes up around that is, when they're starting organizations or really taking a leadership role in the world, there's a lot of pushback, but not direct pushback. It's just, this, what I would call, these systems that are just in place that are just constantly holding them down in one way or another, if that makes sense. And I'm sure you can you can attest to this. Yeah,
that kind of idea that, how am I going to be heard? How am I going to be seen and noticed? Who am I to do this? So it goes from what do I want to produce, to then kind of looking introspectively at who am I, and instead of feeling empowered, a lot of the time, especially women, but all people, kind of question their legitimacy, and fear is kind of the instigator of that, at least from what I've witnessed.
Absolutely. And when you start doing these things, it has a way of bringing out these insecurities and fears in other people, which can tend to exacerbate them in a way. So it's I found that it's really, really important to be clear internally with yourself first, because when you shake the boat, or when you really begin to shake the boat, other people start freaking out too. And whether they mean to or not, it acts as it can be another obstacle. And so, yeah, specifically around, women taking on leadership roles or starting new businesses and not getting the support they want from the men in their lives, or just the people in their lives in general. I've seen that happen tons of times. I mean, I've experienced that myself with coaching. When I started, I remember even my closest friends were like, "Are you stupid? Why would you want to do something like that? Who wants to coach that's 24 or 25?" And it isn't until the last couple of years, maybe 2 years, we're like, okay, I kind of get it now. So yeah, I think that all of my clients in some way or another experience that, especially my millennial clients, when they're reaching out or playing big. My approach to coaching is centered around challenge. And whenever you're truly challenging or stretching yourself, I mean, that's when the internal dialogue starts to get a little crazy and starts to flare up, and the negative self-talk happens, or all the reasons why you can't do it, and all the things to kind of keep you secure in your space and exactly where you are and not move forward tends to come up.
So knowing that, what do you tell these awesome millennials who just want to overcome this and not be held back? So if they're feeling stuck in this kind of fear space, I know there's lots of coaching techniques, but when you think about things that really empower them and get them back on track, what would you share?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most important things is connecting to a sense of purpose outside of yourself. I think that when you connect to something bigger like that, it makes the fears a little less daunting, because it's not just for you, it's for something larger. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a cause or whether it's working with other people or whatnot. When you have something like that in mind, that helps. I think the other thing is, it's not one thing that I've encountered with most people, but especially with millennials, is there's a tendency to want to have it all figured out before they take any action at all. And we all experience this. I've experienced it before, but it tends to come up a lot with millennials around, I want this big dream job or this big dream thing, or to start this business, but I want to figure out all the potential things so I don't have to try to mitigate the risk of failure, which is great. But there becomes a point when you don't take any action, when you're just stuck there trying to figure it all out because you're playing it too safe. And so I think one of the biggest things that you can do to get around that is start building a practice or a habit of taking action immediately, even if it's just a really small action, because momentum does wonders around this stuff.
Yeah, so just even taking a half step forward, so you're not stuck, but you're still not maybe leaping, but you're leading in that sense.
Absolutely, because if you look for the reasons why you want to do something, you can find them. If you look for the reasons why you can't, you will absolutely find them as well. So it's not about not having fear. It's about doing it regardless of whether you have fear or not. And the more you practice that, and the more you move into kind of testing those things and building, I like to call it building up your reserves, or your capacity to handle the discomfort that comes along with fear, the better you'll be able to do it later on. So it's kind of like training yourself. Take a bunch of small risks every day, and eventually when that big risk comes along, it won't seem so big because you've done all these other little ones.
So any words of caution in this? Because that's something that sounds really sexy. It sounds like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take that step forward. Is there anything to note while you're leaning into that fear?
Well, I think words of caution, there's definitely a difference between actual physical fear and then like emotional or fear of doing something that you really want to do. So know the difference of that. If you see a a bear in the woods, maybe don't go take a selfie with it.
So use some knowledge, right? Use some insight.
Definitely use some insight. And I would say the other thing is don't focus on getting rid of the fear. Like, I think too many people focus on trying to get rid of the fear and become fearless, as we mentioned, but it never goes away. Maybe the voice is still there, it's just a little smaller, but it's always still there in some way or another, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So instead of putting all your energy and effort into not having any fear at all, put your energy and effort into doing what you want to do regardless of whether fear is there or not. That way you're in control always, and you get to choose how things go from there.
Yeah, so what about these managers? So there are a lot of cross-generational teams where managers are trying to not only lead millennials, but understand them. And let's say you and I are out there empowering these millennials to kind of lead through their fear and take that step. What do we need to tell the managers to support that process so they're not kind of trying to control it or trying to limit it?
Yeah. Well, I would say lead by example is always first and foremost when I think you're leading anybody. And that includes about being honest about what you're afraid of and taking how you're handling that. I think sometimes we forget that being vulnerable ourselves when we're in a position of leadership actually does tremendous things for our teams. It gives them a great example of what it means to truly be a leader and to screw up and take responsibility for it, but also how we handle these self-emotions that come up when you're leading other people. Because in reality, they're there. Just because you don't see them doesn't mean they don't exist.
Yeah, so basically the managers can't be triggered by their own fear of not being in control or their own fear of being perceived a certain way. They need to be more authentic is what your bottom line is here.
Yeah, definitely be more authentic and practice, embody the things that you want your team to embody. Practice what you preach.
Yeah. Any other advice for managers or maybe even other people on teams that are supporting kind of this, not idea of fearlessness, but this idea of embracing fear rather than hiding from it?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is to always notice that it's there in some way or another, and if you can't find it, you're probably not looking hard enough. I wrote an article a while back on exactly something similar to this, and it was, are you avoiding being a leader? How to stop hiding and start showing up. And it's kind of amazing the ways that we hide, whether it's checking Facebook constantly because we're feeling anxious about the work that we're doing, or we are using Netflix to binge and to avoid feeling discomfort, or not volunteering for things in a work environment because we're afraid of the responsibility that comes along with it. Fear is pretty prevalent in any situation. It's just identifying when you're doing it and when you're not. And the more awareness you can create around it, the more choice you have, because you can't change what you can't see.
I love that. You can't change what you can't see. So we talk a lot about kind of levels of consciousness and levels of competence. So if you're unconscious to something and you don't know you don't know it exists, and you don't know that you don't have competence in it, so essentially you're unconsciously incompetent. That's a mouthful. Your fear is controlling you in that space, and you're afraid of moving forward. Now, let's say you become aware of it, but you're still not great at it. So you're consciously incompetent. That's the space that I think is key. That's the space we have to choose to say, hey, there's something here that doesn't feel great, that's maybe causing some friction, or even I'm afraid of. How do we navigate through this? And that's where, like you said, partnering with a coach, or hopefully having a manager who can support, mentor, and coach you as well is going to be key. But being brave enough and aware enough to take that first step. I think that's the meta view of this that I'm hearing.
Absolutely. And I guess one other strategy that's always very helpful is fear tends to come from ambiguity or the lack of certainty. And so the more that you can do to create a sense of certainty for yourself take smaller steps or do research on, a few things to give you enough certainty that helps a little bit. It's just when things are really uncertain and there's no clarity in things is when fear tends to, show up most, because then there's a million potential negative outcomes that can emerge from that.
Now, isn't that funny where our brains typically go from, okay, what's possible to what's possible to fail versus what's possible to succeed? So a million potential negative outcomes, there's an equal amount, if not more, positive potential outcomes. So one of the things that I've noticed is many millennials almost fear success more than failure. So when you're talking about kind of looking at the unknown and looking what's possible, both for where could things go right, but where could things go wrong, that fear of not knowing seems to sometimes freeze people up. So that concept of just not being able to lean into it or take a step forward because, well, what if it's worse? I might as well just stay here. So that reminds me of one of my very favorite quotes by Marianne Williamson. She talks a lot about don't play small. Like, be able to shine your light and share your gift, so then you're able to give other people silent permission to do the same. So she says your playing small doesn't serve the world. And that just hits me in such a powerful way when we're talking about leaning into fearlessness, leading beyond fear. So I wanted to just offer that up as well. So is there anything else, Ray, that you wanted to highlight or share as we wrap up today?
Yeah, and just to build off of what you just said, I think that it's a great example to think about people that are really good at shining their light in the world and that are doing really amazing things. And it's really easy to kind of make up a story in your head that, oh, they're just doing that because they're better in some way or that they don't experience fear. And I would challenge you to go out and get into conversation with them and ask them what it was like to do the things that they were doing. And I'm willing to bet that 9 times out of 10, there was a lot of fear that they encountered along the way, and they just chose to move beyond it instead of get stuck by it.
That's really, really empowering. And I've just so enjoyed our time today. Like, just you have so much insight and wisdom, and I'm excited to see what our listeners do with this, what inspires them and encourages them. And I invite anyone who's listening to share that with Ray and myself. You can check out more information on Ray and his work in the world. There's a link in our blog. And I also invite you to lead beyond fear this month. Really think about, what would that look like for me? What would my first step be? Where is fear preventing me from playing big? Where am I kind of shrinking back? And you can also check out leadwithintention.com for some more insight and some more motivation. We have tons of inspiring graphics on our Instagram feed that will keep you going and kind of give you some fuel. So remember, turn your fear into fuel. That's a big, big theme for this month. So Ray, thank you again for being with us. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Leslie, for having me here. And it's always a pleasure to be able to hang out with you for a little while.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks to everyone who's listening. We really have appreciated just your support in this. And again, this is Leslie Bosserman inviting you to join the wholehearted leadership revolution as you continue leading with intention.